When I first created this channel, making a definitive ranking of my favourite Doctors was one of my first ideas. Now having done 20 episodes of my podcast Exterminating Doctor Who, it felt right to get my definitive ranking on the record. And I'm glad this video has taken me so long to make, as I've had to revise a few placements in the list. So before we begin, a few terms and conditions. This is for every on-screen Doctor with a clear placement in the timeline. That means Doctors such as Richard E. Grant's Ninth Doctor or the Valeyard won't be included. It also means that the Ruth Doctor also won't be included, as I think it's too soon to really class her as a true Doctor, as we just don't have enough information about her or a good judge on her character. Plus, I am not a fan of the Timeless Child in the slightest, so I prefer to pretend it doesn't exist when doing lists like this. So it goes without saying that any of these incarnations are also not on the list. So without further ado, let's enter the collection. For a very long time, my last place spot traditionally always went to the same Doctor. However, this last place has changed over the past couple of years. And if that doesn't give a clue as to who it is, well, just consider which Doctor has been most prominent for the past couple of years. Wait, no, not you. My last place goes to the 13th Doctor, Jodie Whittaker. As much as I was initially resistant to having a female Doctor, questioning how well it would be executed, I got over this after seeing The Woman Who Fell to Earth. And by no means a perfect episode, I hoped the following episodes would at least follow what it set out, but that wasn't the case. Series 11 and 12 are my least favourite series of the revival, and I've discussed this many times on the podcast. I only keep mentioning the podcast as I elaborate on these topics. I'm not just doing shameless self-promotions. While Series 11 did do some bold things that I respected and thought Doctor Who was actually in need of, such as no series arc, brand new villains, standalone episodes, a bigger budget, better production value and more historicals, it was all very lacklustre and no character was given any time to be fleshed out beyond bland exposition dumps. And this is the key element of New Who that separates it from Classic Who. Gone are the days of the adventure of the week with one-dimensional assistants and villains, and now we have a show that strives on character development, but there was very little of this in Series 11 or 12. But as in previous series where we would have a Doctor who can lift the weak episodes by their sheer presence, the same cannot be said here. One of the key characteristics that I think is integral to the Doctor is how well they command a room, to enter the situation of the week and immediately clarify themselves as the leader to save the day. But this is the biggest thing missing from this Doctor. Ironically, the only time I felt this Doctor ever commanded a room was in Orphan 55, but, well, just look at the rest of the episode. With such a large ensemble of companions and guest cast on top of that, I sometimes even forget that the 13th Doctor is in a scene as she simply fades into the background, making a show about the Doctor, not about the Doctor. Series 11 started with an emphasis on making this Doctor very hands-on and creative, and I liked this, but by the end of the series, she's using the sonic screwdriver pretty much every time we see her. Likewise, Series 11 began with her being very inclusive and friendly to those around her, but soon enough became dismissive of other views and downright rude.
I should say a reassuring thing now, shouldn't I? Yeah, probably.
This darkness was sometimes interesting, especially when the fam would confront the Doctor about never actually opening up or telling them things despite the friendly facade. However, this culminated in the Timeless Child, which I feel I've wasted way too much of my breath on. I did really want to like this Doctor, but the ill-informed acting from Jodie Whittaker and the incredibly weak characterisation from the writing has let her down massively. There was potential, as The Woman Who Fell to Earth showed, and even The Witchfinders. Though this episode has its own flaws, the Doctor is actually written pretty damn well. This Doctor needs a lot of development to create her own clear identity to allow me to move her higher in this list, but unfortunately it looks as though she only has one series left to achieve this. At number 13 is the 6th Doctor, Colin Baker. The 6th Doctor was traditionally my default last place, but I recently revisited some episodes from his era and found more to like about his Doctor than that of the 13th. This Doctor is perhaps the darkest incarnation, coming off as a real jerk at times, but there is still a genuine affection for his companions and a sarcastic wit that I enjoy.
Part of the scene's being shown by the scrapyard here. I'm sorry, Valeyard, force of habit.
What doesn't work for me about the 6th Doctor is the excess and just how messy his era is. While he has these dark elements, they juxtaposed with the light-hearted tone of the mid-80s era of Doctor Who, and it just doesn't work. Then showrunner Jonathan Nathan Turner tried to include many household names from the world of showbiz and light entertainment in Doctor Who. But when paired with an era which saw the Doctor strangle Perry after some deranged rant, leave people to die in an acid bath, and commit genocide against slave race the Vervoids, it really makes for an era of Doctor Who that is disjointed and hard to watch. An obvious signifier of this is with the Doctor's costume. From what I know of behind the scenes during this era, neither Colin Baker nor the costume department thought that the bright colours were a good idea, but they had an idea from the higher-ups and did their best to make it work. Colin Baker famously wanted costumes similar to the one that Christopher Eccleston later got, meaning his actual costume couldn't be any more different. Any notion of quirkiness doesn't translate with his costume, making it just weird, and not in a good way. Now this Doctor has been salvaged in Big Finish with key lessons like the often praised Jubilee and the Marion conspiracy, helping to greatly redeem his character. But as the TV show is perhaps the first point of exposure for most fans to this Doctor, it leaves a lot to be desired. At 12, we have the 7th Doctor, Sylvester McCoy. This is one that I know will upset some classic Who fans out there who quite often have the 7th Doctor high on their lists or even at number 1. But continuing on from the 6th Doctor, I just find myself so uninterested with this era of Doctor Who. It starts with my least favourite companion ever in the form of Mel, so that doesn't get this era off to a good start. Though I do really like Ace. There are a few standout episodes which feature her. Remembrance of the Daleks is one of my favourite classic stories, but Silver Nemesis is my least favourite classic story of them all. No, seriously, why are there neo-Nazis, Renaissance aristocrats, awful jazz and Cybermen in the same story? It doesn't even make sense by Doctor Who standards. Anyway, back to the 7th Doctor, and he's an incarnation that has just never really resonated with me. Though the 7th Doctor did become darker towards the end of his reign, pretty much once he started wearing the brown variation of his costume, this wasn't enough to correct the missteps of his previous series where the show decided to put more emphasis on the Doctor's silly children's entertainer side. Plus, this version only exists for the 4 stories of season 26. As with the 6th Doctor, this strand has been developed further in Big Finish, but I haven't heard many of these as there doesn't seem to be as many stories with glowing praise as with the 6th or 8th Doctors. Though this Doctor can be good when he's dark, we just didn't get enough of it, leaving the rest of his era very uninteresting and bland to me. I don't necessarily think his Doctor's outright bad, but he has never clicked with me, and the darker sides of other Doctors higher in this list are far more preferable. But I am going to move on to the next Doctor now before I say any more about Silver Nemesis. To complete the 80s, at number 11 is the 5th Doctor, Peter Davison. This is probably the last classic era that I can say I enjoy for the most part. It does have some hiccups, like Warriors of the Deep does exist, but generally I enjoy most of this era. I actually think the 5th Doctor is incredibly underrated, but I much prefer the remaining Doctors over him, so can't put him any higher in this list. I find very little about the 5th Doctor to actually be a negative, besides from the feeling that he is a very safe incarnation. Coming off the back of the 7-year-long era of the incredibly popular 4th Doctor, much of this Doctor feels simply inoffensive in places. I can see arguments on both sides of this characteristic. Playing it safe won't put off people who had joined in the previous era, but also making him his own defined Doctor could distinguish him from the 4th Doctor and take a bold new direction for the show. However, what we got is fine. And that's just it really. Fine. He's watchable, his episodes are enjoyable, and he's a good Doctor even if playing it safe. Compare this to the 13th Doctor, who also seemed to be playing it safe in Series 11, the 5th Doctor actually had a clear defining characteristic. He is often referred to as the compassionate Doctor, a Doctor who always understood people's feelings and their point of view even if he disagreed with it. This is ultimately what led to his downfall, giving Perry the Spectrox toxemia antidote and leaving himself to regenerate. This defining feature is also what helps separate him from the other Doctors in the 5 Doctors, or as David Tennant describes it, 3 Doctors, a man in a wig, and some clips of the other one. The 5th Doctor's era is home to some incredible classic stories like The Caves of Androzani, Earthshock, and The Visitation, and honestly, Black Orchid is a guilty pleasure of mine. I also really dig his outfit. In no other era of Doctor Who other than the early 80s could you get away with putting the Doctor in a cricket outfit. It also complements the youthfulness of this Doctor as, until Matt Smith, Peter Davison was the youngest actor to play the Doctor. That burst of life and energy is what I find especially endearing about this incarnation. Oh, and his spot-on Troughton impression in Castrovalva.
Jamie! Jamie! You go back!
No, I have to stay with you, Doctor.
No nonsense, be sensible, go back! When I say run, run!
Overall, this is a Doctor that I have a lot of love for, but the safeness lends me to prefer the other Doctors in this list. From one youthful Doctor to another. Next up is the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith. This one might be quite surprising for someone like me whose era is New Who. This was the Doctor that gave me my first sense of disillusionment with the revival. Though he starts and ends strong, the way his character was treated in series 6 and 7 massively put me off this incarnation. One of the many things that both the 5th and 11th Doctors share in common is that they both follow on from the show's most popular eras. Following on from David Tennant's 10th Doctor is no easy feat, and I think Matt Smith managed to do an incredibly good job of it. My favourite thing about the 11th Doctor is that he had a certain quirk about him that really juxtaposed his personality. Though he was very energetic, he had the wisdom of a very old man. The 11th Doctor was always very clearly an old man in a young man's body. This culminated perfectly in The Time of the Doctor, an episode that many people criticise but I actually really like. While the 5th Doctor was an incarnation to play it safe, the 11th Doctor took that bolder direction that aimed to distinguish him from his predecessor. Yes, both the 10th and 11th Doctors had a similar energy and romance, but they are both fundamentally different people. The 10th Doctor had learned to accept his past, and was coming to terms with what it meant for his future, while the 11th Doctor was always seemingly aware that this was his final regeneration, and he just wanted to have fun, make new friends, and not really talk about where he came from or was going. And this was when the Doctor was strongest, in Series 5 and in his final specials. But the same cannot be said for the cartoonish way he was portrayed for the remainder of his era, which became quite tiresome and irritating. How did we go from this?
If you're smart, if you value your continued existence, if you have any plans about seeing tomorrow, there's one thing you never ever put in a trap.
And what would that be, sir?
Me. To this. The 11th Doctor was at his best when he was at a low point or displaying weakness. In fact, this is one of my favourite scenes to feature the Doctor for that very reason. Whether it was his fear of dying or his moments at wit's end, it was scenes that made those around him fear him that this Doctor shone, which is what makes it a shame that it took a while for the show to reconnect this. Though I think the Of the Doctor trilogy really helped reconnect him with his Series 5 self, it wasn't enough to place him higher on this list. Now the next one is where the revision has been made, moving this Doctor much lower on the list. It may be surprising, but in 9th place is the War Doctor, John Hurt. The War Doctor's only full-length appearance is just 77 minutes long, and that's without subtracting the scenes he isn't in. Despite its limited screen time, this Doctor made such a huge impact that I think he's an incredibly strong incarnation. However, he was once much higher on this list. So what made him fall? Not his screen time, that's for sure, and I also enjoyed his Big Finish work, but it's actually because of something Paul McGann said in the behind the scenes of his Big Finish box set Time War 1. McGann alluded to finding his own incarnation more interesting than the War Doctor, as this was the one who gave in to the demands of the Time War and became the frontline fighter, whereas the 8th Doctor was the one to maintain the moral stance and do all he could to avoid the war. And that made me come to the revelation that I agree with McGann. This is the culmination of the dark sides of the Doctor, well characterised and expertly acted by the legendary John Hurt, who I still can't believe was even in Doctor Who, never mind playing the Doctor. But I do prefer this idea of resilience against the war. Yes, the War Doctor never wielded a gun or did any of the traditional soldier things, but it's still more of a submittal to what was being demanded of him. And this is really what has changed my perception. However, I absolutely love the idea that this is the Doctor who stopped calling himself the Doctor, and one of my highlights of the first Big Finish box set is his constant reprimanding of people who call him the Doctor. The introduction of the Time War into New Who is one of the most ingenious things that Russell T Davies could have done, and has been my focal area in exploring Big Finish as I find it so fascinating. Not only does it introduce a wealth of story potential, but also adds so much character development to the Doctor throughout the revival. A lot of the fallout trauma can be seen in the 9th Doctor, but it is the War Doctor who did all that we heard about since the show returned. The concepts around the War Doctor are perhaps more interesting than the War Doctor himself, as the ideas about what happened to him during the Time War dominate the contemplative version that we see in The Day of the Doctor. But I still love the bridge between classic and New Who that he became in that episode, and also this classic scene.
They're screwdrivers, what are you going to do, assemble a cabinet at them?
I love the technically younger Doctor acting like the disapproving elder of his younger, older selves. Oh, it's all very...
Timey-wimey?
I am very much a fan of this Doctor, but having finally started listening to Big Finish, I realise that I personally find the wonder around the War Doctor slightly more interesting than the War Doctor himself. And if you are paying close attention, you can probably guess who is in 8th place. Fittingly, the 8th Doctor, Paul McGann. Originally, the 8th Doctor was in the War Doctor's place on this list, but having recently rediscovered him, I have absolutely taken to this Doctor. We did a podcast episode on the TV movie, and it gave me a great chance to revisit this incarnation as I hadn't seen the movie for years. This sparked my interest in discovering more on Big Finish, so I gave a listen to his adventures on Spotify, as well as the Time War 1 box set that I mentioned earlier. This was my first ever Big Finish box set, and some may see that as an odd choice for a first, but wow, I enjoyed it a lot. This idea of the Doctor desperately trying to avoid the war and maintaining a stubborn stance against involvement piqued my interest more than the Doctor who does give in to the war. This incarnation also gets the build-up of events that led to him becoming the War Doctor, which is also fascinating. Despite its poor reputation, part 3 of the box set, The Conscript, was a thoroughly enjoyable listen as the Doctor's plunged into a Time Lord boot camp against his will, and without shedding too many spoilers, he generates a certain dissent in the squadron against the Time Lord commanders, who he sees mirroring the tactics of the Daleks. I love this so much, and hearing a passionate McGann's soothing voice makes it all the better. Taking his limited on-screen appearances is an odd one, as the TV movie and Night of the Doctor are so different. One is literally at the start of his incarnation, and the other at the end. The TV movie has its positives and negatives, though I personally do enjoy it as camp proto-New Who, but this newly romantic and charming Doctor is an absolute highlight. You don't get to the romantic Doctors of the Russell T Davies era without Paul McGann. This highlight also applies to Night of the Doctor. I fondly remember the moment this Doctor utters,
"I'm a doctor, but probably not the one you expect,"
and believing he absolutely was. The charm, the wit, the romantic suave, the ability to command all attention. Everything that makes the Doctor was all there in just one line. My only complaint about this Doctor is that the darker and dangerous side isn't as prominent. Perhaps it is in the leather box sets, as I call them, but I am yet to visit them, so I'm really only basing this on the content mentioned previously. The fun romanticism and enthusiasm is really nice to see and or hear, but I would like to hear this Doctor pushed a bit further, which could place him even high on this list when I get around to it. Next up at number 7 is the original, you might say. The first Doctor, William Hartnell. This is the Doctor who first appeared on our television screens back in 1963. This is the Doctor who captured the hearts of the nation and secured the show's legacy for the next 58 years. This is the Doctor who stole the TARDIS and ran away from Gallifrey. Not you. This is the Doctor who said this.
What you need is a jolly good smack bottom.
But we don't talk about that. This is an amazing Doctor. Though an unearthly child is slow and the web planet is just, well, the web planet, there hasn't been a single episode from the first Doctor's era that I haven't enjoyed.
Love, pride, hate, fear. Have you no emotions, sir?
The stories might go on forever. I'm looking at you, the Daleks, but the thing that allows you to carry on watching is the infatuation with Hartnell's Doctor. He comes across perfectly as the granddad you wish you had, all the while reminding you of the one you already have. He might be grumpy and arrogant in places, but in the perfect example of what separates this Doctor from the sixth Doctor is that the first Doctor is so charming and so magic, that no matter what arrogancies he has, you still want to spend time with him and put up with 3 hours of 1960s trippy sci-fi poor effects and actors getting lines wrong. If you've seen the 2013 TV movie An Adventure in Space and Time, you'll know what I'm about to say. It's a great performance by David Bradley, who of course later played the Doctor in Twice Upon a Time, but this drama shows us the effort that Hartnell put into the show and how much he cared about the role. Whether it's labelling the controls on the TARDIS console for continuity, or playing Daleks with children in the local park, Hartnell gave the show so much love and so much care that its success has so much to thank him for. The characterization of the Doctor in this era makes him so lovable. Every time he does that little Yoda laugh, it brings a smile to your face and you get a feeling that this Doctor is really the 11th Doctor in reverse. This is clearly an old man's body, but the Doctor inside is so young and cheeky and has this great wonder about the universe and desire to explore that you see in children. Yes, a lot of the characterization that we associate as key qualities of the Doctor today are missing from the first Doctor, but that's because the show was only in its infancy. This is a time in the show before the Master, before Davros, before Gallifrey was even named, and even the Cybermen only made their debut in Hartnell's final story. The only reason I can't put the first Doctor higher is because many of my favourite qualities of the Doctor are absent in this era, but I absolutely adore this Doctor. And also shout out to Planet of Giants for being incredibly underrated and one of my favourite classic episodes. In 6th place is the third Doctor, Jon Pertwee. If you're wanting to introduce children to Classic Who, I would argue that beginning with the third Doctor's era is the best. It's in colour for a start, a brand new era of Doctor Who with bright colours, which the title sequence reminds us of each and every episode. But this era contains one of the show's most consistently well-written periods of stories with hit after hit after hit. This era has something for everyone in it. It has wacky monsters, it's predominantly set on Earth creating a bold new format for the programme, the first truly feminist companions actually being responsible for doing stuff rather than just standing around and screaming. It has action, it has action, it has action, and the Doctor, well, this is the James Bond Doctor. With the Doctor exiled to Earth after Troughton's Earthbound stories a few years prior proved successful, the third Doctor was to be Doctor Who's answer to 007. The third Doctor is perhaps the most unique with the most contradictions. With an attitude and dress sense of the rogue bohemian, but the behaviour of an authority-respecting statesman, 3 is an interesting Doctor, but an exciting one. While other Doctors also display arrogance, the third Doctor has an especially flamboyant arrogance which demands attention but never once makes him unlikable. He's the most charming Doctor. Whatever he does, you're rooting for him. Always on the side of good and working with military men, but never once wielding a weapon, and instead running into the battle with a sonic screwdriver. The first Doctor to properly use the sonic screwdriver, as Troughton literally used it to unscrew screws. This era is also home to my 2 all-time favourite classic stories, The Demons and The Green Death. I don't know what it is about these particular episodes that I love so much, but I do. I think this Doctor is best understood when watching his episodes with the Master, and there's a lot of these. In fact, a third of all his stories feature the Master. I believe that this Doctor-Master relationship is the best in the entire show. You truly believe that they are brothers from another time, which of course was the original plan until Delgado's untimely death in 1973. But this is the era that best tackled the prospect of the Doctor having an arch nemesis he desperately wanted to be good but couldn't escape constantly battling his resistance. The action hero, charming and witty Third Doctor is the only classic Doctor who would have made this possible. I don't think the Doctor ever really left Pertwee, and I don't think Pertwee ever really left the Doctor. Plus, we got to see the Doctor dressed as a cleaning lady, so there's that too. The Doctor to begin the top 5 is the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. Everything that we associate with being the quality of the Doctor comes from the second Doctor. Except perhaps Jon Pertwee, every actor to have played the Doctor has based their performance on what Troughton brought to the role. Whether unconsciously or consciously, like Davison, McCoy and Smith, who stated Troughton as their biggest inspiration, the most defining feature of this Doctor is that he was extremely tactical. He had this way of entering a room and approaching people that made him look like a sort of comedic character, but he knew he was secretly coming up with a plan. There are a lot of based under siege stories in the second Doctor's era, probably my favourite Doctor Who story format, that allowed him to enter a room in this guise of buffoonery and disappear into the background to explore and work out what he needed to do. Take a story like the Moonbase, for example. For much of this episode, he's playing a long game, disappearing into the lab, biding his time, waiting for his theories to be proven correct. When the Cybermen finally show themselves in full force at the base, the Doctor leaves his background presence and comes to the front to defeat the monsters. That's the quality I most love about the second Doctor, his ability to immediately switch from, don't mind the man in the silly hat playing the recorder, to this man is in charge and he will get us out of the situation. It's a perfect blend. He's a Doctor that comes across as very humble, yet extremely non-human. The space hobo that stumbles into a dangerous situation and allows others to try and work out what's happening before he steps up to the plate to intervene and save the day. While the first Doctor did make his touching farewell speech to Susan, he was a Doctor who very rarely shared a sensitive side. This side is poured into the second Doctor in what is my favourite of his stories, The Tomb of the Cybermen. His speech to Victoria is not only a telling insight into the Doctor's life, at the time it would have added to the mystery of the character who we knew next to nothing about, but even on a more personal level, this speech is something that everyone in the audience can relate to, and this helps warm us to the second Doctor.
You probably can't remember your family.
Oh yes, I can when I want to, and that's the point really. I have to really want to bring them back in front of my eyes. The rest of the time they sleep in my mind, and I forget, and so will you. Oh yes, you will. You'll find there's so much else to think about.
His relationship with his companions, notably Jamie, is one of the closest in the show's history, and this is something that is so lovely to see. A genuine care for the welfare of his companions' safety, while the Doctor knows he's alien and mentally distant from them. As well as the characterisation of the Doctor being incredible, Patrick Troughton is also an amazing actor. Though the second Doctor was especially fortunate with exceptional episodes, which makes the number of missing stories even more upsetting, the quality of the second Doctor is due to Troughton's acting. However good his comics, novels and audio adventures are, the one quality that they sorely lack is his acting. His interpretation of certain lines and action blocks is so unique that that's what makes his Doctor so special. His acting was so appreciated by the show that they even gave him the Enemy of the World, a story where Troughton plays both the hero and the villain to truly showcase his versatility and range. Though there are other Doctors that follow in this ranking, anyone who believes that Troughton is the best Doctor definitely has a strong argument. In fourth place, we have the ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston. I was 4 years old when Doctor Who returned to TV back in 2005, making the ninth Doctor my first. I vaguely remember watching Rose when it was on TV, but my first clear memory of watching Doctor Who was with Father's Day. I still remember being terrified of the Reapers, and the episode remains one of my firm favourites to this day. And while the ninth Doctor will always hold a nostalgic place in my heart because of these childhood memories, it's not just the nostalgia that makes me love the ninth Doctor so much. This is a seriously, seriously good Doctor. With just 13 on-screen episodes to his name in an extremely overlooked series, Christopher Eccleston did an extremely admirable job with just the short amount of time he had on the show. This is the Doctor they decided to use for the reboot of the show after 9 years since the TV movie and 16 years since the last classic story, and they couldn't have chosen a Doctor more different than those original 8. The standard BBC received pronunciation had gone in favour of a northern accent, and the standard suits were replaced with a V-neck jumper and a leather jacket. We were entering a bold new phase of the show that starkly contrasted what had come before. This Doctor actually received real development and a character arc that was so well executed. From the Doctor plagued by PTSD to a Doctor that was funny and was rediscovering the good in the universe. If you strip back the trauma and the hilarious sarcasm of the ninth Doctor, you still have the charming Doctors who came before him. Expertly acted and expertly written by Russell T Davies, This was the Doctor at his most vulnerable. He was an open wound, distracting himself from his trauma and making himself busy by briefly returning to Earth to deal with the Nestene consciousness. But while he's there, meeting Rose Tyler, who would change the Doctor's life and redirect him onto a path of friendship and doing the right thing. My only complaint with this Doctor will forever be that we didn't get more, but Big Finish appear to be rectifying that with some great audios. I have little other complaints as I don't think this Doctor ever put a foot wrong, but once again it's a matter of preference. I miss this Doctor, but I couldn't have asked for a better introduction to the show. We now enter the top 3, with the final classic Doctor on this list, the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker. If the Doctor were real, he would absolutely be the 4th Doctor. Like John Pertwee, Tom Baker and his Doctor are one and the same. The 4th Doctor is the Doctor at his most unhinged. Both Tom and the 4th Doctor are truly mental.
I wouldn't even say no to a salami sandwich.
While Tom Baker is an incredibly versatile actor, I do sometimes wonder how much of his time as the 4th Doctor was acting, and how much was just him being himself and reading a few lines about alien stuff. And while he clearly isn't putting in as much effort in his later stories, some of those episodes are still very enjoyable. Like, seriously, Full Circle is an amazing story. Coming from a highly successful era of the show, the 4th Doctor was luckily entering the golden age of Classic Who. During the mid to late 70s, Doctor Who repeatedly had incredible episodes, and some of my absolute favourites come from this time. There are of course a few misses in amongst the hits, but generally the episodes are especially strong. This era of Doctor Who lasted from 1974 to 1981, with the show reaching a height of 16 million viewers with City of Death, the highest in the show's history. Partly due to ITV being on strike, so the nation had no choice but to watch Doctor Who, but also reflective of the show's popularity at the time. The 4th Doctor is seen by most to be the most iconic, instantly recognisable across pop culture, and the incarnation that most would depict if asked to draw the Doctor. The 4th Doctor's greatest asset was his comedy. Baker's comedic timing is perfect and has been utilised numerous times both before and after playing the Doctor. It is his additions to the character's quirks and adding a real eyebrow-raising weirdness that makes the 4th Doctor so fun to watch. The 4th Doctor's legacy isn't owed only to his comedy though. On several occasions we get a serious side to the Doctor that felt very harsh and very real. With monologues and ethical debates, you get the sense that the comedy of the 4th Doctor is a front to disguise his true cunning self.
But if I kill, wipe out a whole intelligent life form, then I become like them. I'd be no better than the Daleks.
You get a real sense that this guy is alien, probably more so than any other incarnation. It was no accident that this Doctor was so successful. The 4th Doctor had some amazing episodes, sure, but the true success of this era was in the characterisation and performance of the 4th Doctor and Tom Baker. For many he is the perfect Doctor, and I do see why. But as with Troughton, he may be your number one, but he isn't mine due to sheer personal preference. If you listen to the podcast, you'll be very aware of who my favourite Doctor is, so this will come as no surprise. But to complete the list, I must do it anyway. In second place is the 10th Doctor, David Tennant. Alongside the 4th Doctor, this is the version of the Doctor that most people imagine when they hear Doctor Who mentioned. With constantly amazing episodes, the best companions in Doctor Who history, a production value that we've never seen before, and this Doctor taking the lead, it's really no wonder why this is the true golden age of the show's history. I remember the time when everything from pyjamas to froobs were branded with Doctor Who. This display at Toys R Us, God rest its soul, brings me so many happy memories. But like with the 9th Doctor, my love for this era doesn't just come about from nostalgia. My love for this Doctor comes from both the characterisation and the acting. David Tennant, John Hurt and Peter Capaldi, to me, are the greatest actors to have played the Doctor. I still follow Tennant's career religiously to this day, watching anything that he is in. And he wouldn't have had that effect on me if he was a poor actor or a poor Doctor. This Doctor is the most human. While 4 and 12 are arguably the most alien, the 10th Doctor is the one who is most grounded, and I think this is strong characterisation for him. After the depressed and traumatised 9th Doctor found a new appreciation for life thanks to Rose Tyler, wanting to connect to Earth and take on a more romantic persona seems only logical. The romantic Doctor really came to the forefront here. So much so that Rose was the girlfriend, Martha was the rebound, and Donna was just the friend. Having this close connection to the companions is what allowed the Doctor to grow, but also led to his demise. But on top of being this greatly human, witty and charming incarnation, he was also one of the most dangerous. If you dared disagree with him or push him too far, he would snap.
The laws of time are mine, and they will obey me!
Much of the 10th Doctor's especially later tenure was focused on him dealing with the loss of the Time Lords and what it meant for him as a person going forward. 9 had accepted what had happened and was ready to move on, and the 10th Doctor was him moving on. But after losing your entire species and your oldest friend who had also now seemingly perished, the Doctor was pushed to going power mad. What's interesting about this Doctor is that it's estimated he only aged about 5 years between regenerating from the 9th Doctor into the 11th, which is mind-blowing, but does also confuse how many stories are currently being mined out of this incarnation. This was my favourite Doctor for a very long time, though he now sits at a close second. He was a Doctor who pulled in 13 million viewers for one of his Christmas specials without ITV being on strike. And in fact, I don't even mind episodes like Love and Monsters or Fear Her, not only for nostalgia, but for Tennant's performance in them. Often you don't need amazing episodes to prove yourself as an amazing Doctor. The 10th Doctor was just fortunate he was given some of the best episodes in the show's history. The Girl in the Fireplace, The Impossible Planet, Doomsday, Human Nature, Blink, Utopia, Voyage of the Damned, The Fires of Pompeii, Silence in the Library, Midnight, Turn Left, The Stolen Earth and the Waters of Mars. However, as I said, there is one more to take the top spot. So in first place is the 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi. This is a Doctor repeatedly overlooked by certain Doctor Who fans, and by critics who seem to skip this era and pretend it never happened. Sometimes it feels as though the show itself ignores the Capaldi era, especially in Series 12 with the destruction of Gallifrey and the retcon of Missy's entire character arc. But the 12th Doctor's era is one that I have great affection for. I was fairly disappointed with Doctor Who between Series 6 and 7, questioning the poor storylines and losing interest in what the show had to offer. But with the hype around the 50th anniversary and the announcement that we'd be getting an older Doctor again, I became so excited for the future of the show. And this Doctor didn't disappoint. Sure, some of the episodes did, but what allows me to constantly revisit them is his Doctor. I strongly believe that Capaldi is the greatest actor to have played the Doctor. There is so much versatility, so much range, the ability to go from grumpy and dark to light-hearted and fun within seconds. Even with the poorest of scripts that Capaldi was given, I still find myself revisiting these episodes to see him. The delivery of lines and interactions with fellow cast members is outstanding, resulting in scenes like the war speech to really showcase the sheer talent he had.
This is not a war. I fought in a bigger war than you will ever know. I did worse things than you could ever imagine. And when I close my eyes, I hear more screams than anyone could ever be able to count.
He had presence and gravitas and every quality the Doctor should have. There's a common joke that there could be a multi-Doctor story with the 12th Doctors from Series 8, 9 and 10 because they are so different. But I see this as the best character development that any Doctor had in the show. The 12th Doctor began his tenure as a grumpy old man who questioned why he was still alive. He hadn't anticipated surviving past his 13th incarnation, and yet there he was. It took him time to get adjusted. This was then accelerated with the return of the Master after he was seemingly killed, again, and having a potential glimmer of hope to find Gallifrey again. But then they take it a step further in Series 9, where he's having what some have described as a midlife crisis. This is a Doctor who has received a confession dial and is now doing anything he can to distract himself from death. He's accepted his new regenerations and now doesn't want to lose them. These emotions are accelerated even further with the death of Clara at the hands of the Time Lords and their billions of years of torture on him simply over a fairy tale. But come Series 10 and we have the 12th Doctor who has finally found the balance between the both. He can be crotchety and sarcastic, providing for some of my favourite jokes and quips that I quote on a day-to-day basis, but the Doctor can also be very caring and grandfather-like. This is a quality that is very reminiscent of the first Doctor, so much so that they even met in 12's final adventure. What makes the 12th Doctor so special, like the 4th Doctor, is that this is how I imagine the Doctor to be in real life. And this is because Capaldi understood the role. This was his dream role to play. Having been a lifelong fan and viewer, to finally play the Doctor is a dream come true. He incorporated elements from every single Doctor that came before him to instruct his interpretation of the Doctor. And by the end of Series 10, the 12th Doctor had settled firmly into the idea of the Doctor being a lonely figure who will live for a long time, but those around him won't.
Who I am is where I stand, where I stand. It's where I fall.
A man who had lived too long and lost too much across all three of his series. His best friend, his wife, his TARDIS team, and his oldest frenemy. There are days when I remember that Capaldi is no longer the Doctor and I genuinely feel saddened. I desperately want him to return in Big Finish as I think there is a wealth of potential to explore. There are potential adventures during his time with Clara, during his time with Bill and Nardole, or in his time in between Series 9 and 10, alone. Bill also claims that the Doctor had been a professor at the university for around 50 years, which unlocks the potential for other companions that he could have tutored, or mini-adventures that he had with Missy while guarding the vault. The only faults of this Doctor are some of the episodes he was given, as his character and performance were perfect. His brash adventure with the scientific cosmic grandad contemplation allows his Doctor to take all the best elements of those who had come before him and combine them into one ultimate, truly special incarnation. I absolutely love this Doctor, and he will be my favourite for a very long time coming.
Everything ends. That is always sad. But everything begins again too, and that's always happy.
But that's just my list. Everyone's Doctor ranking is wildly different. If anyone has actually made it through this video, I'm sure they'll find placements or reasonings they disagree with, but that's what makes Doctor Who so good. There's something for everyone and no two people will enjoy the same things. Hardly anyone will have the exact same Doctor ranking. So what's yours? Thank you for watching, if indeed you still are. I would greatly appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. If you have Instagram too, why not drop me a follow over at Nowhere Collection, or check out my podcast Exterminating Doctor Who. I have been The Collector, this has been The Den of Antiquities, and I'll see you next time.